Colleagues, an instrument, a questionnaire was disseminated. Did you complete the instrument? I hope so. Did you receive a questionnaire?
No.
Didn't receive a questionnaire. No, we didn't get a questionnaire. I'm going to speak to our technical team. Mr. Doyle, can you contact Mr. Wallen to ensure all colleagues receive the instrument?
If they have no questions.
I got my questionnaire in my email.
Colleagues, it is important for you to complete the instrument, so please do so. When you come in the room, please mute your microphones, please.
Sorry, excuse me 1 minute, sir. The questionnaire is.
We're up to 179 colleagues, just waiting a bit more. Give others about 5 minutes or so to enter the room. Okay, so some persons completed the instrument already, that is good. Good afternoon. Laurie, how are you doing? Okay, we're up to 213. Please, when you enter, please mute your microphones. Ms. Pratt, please mute your microphones, please.
Trace.
Patrick, may I begin now?
Mr. Marsh.
Yes, you're alive. Okay. Good day, Mr. Reynolds. How are you doing? Colleagues, good morning. And good to have you. And welcome to the Hugh Shearer Labour Studies Institute forum entitled Public Sector Compensation Restructuring, Remuneration or Inflated Expectations. My name is Lauren Marsh again, and I'm the acting head for the Hugh Shearer Labour Studies Institute. Now, today we have three presenters who will share their perspective on the public sector compensation restructuring. We have with us Mrs. Helen Davis-White, President for the Jamaican Confederation of Trade Unions, Dr. Andre Horton, economist and senior lecturer for UWI-MONA, and of course, Mr. O'Neill Grant, who is the president of the Jamaica Civil Service Association. Now, the intent is for us to have this conversation, this webinar for 1 hour. So what we'll do is that we'll take the presentations first. We'll have Mr. Grant who will present first, then Mrs. Davis-White, and then Dr. Horton. After our presentations, you will then be given 15 minutes to ask your questions and make your comments. All right, so with that said, I'm going to invite our first presenter, Mr. O'Neill Grant, who is the president of the Jamaica Services Association. And Mr. Grant is also the vice president of the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions and a member of the Partnership for Jamaica. He is also an executive member of the Caribbean Public Sector Association. O'Neill, how are you doing?
Doing well, thank you.
Good to see you, my friend and brother. And good to have you in this particular forum.
Great to be here.
Yeah, man, I know it's great to be here, but I want to hear your perspective. So, colleagues, without any further delay, I'm going to hand the floor over to my colleague, Mr. Grant, to do his presentation. You may go ahead, Mr. Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Marsh, and welcome everyone to this very important conversation that we're having this afternoon on compensation review. The moot topic that we're looking at is whether it's better or inflated expectation. And put this in context. In 2014, the compensation review was anchored under the public sector master rationalization plan. And it also speaks in that master rationalization in 2014 of an effective compensation that is needed to direct the manner in which people are attracted, paid, and rewarded. Part of the Jamaica's extended fund facility with the IMF. All right, sorry. The extended fund facility at the time, Jamaica's wage to GDP bill to 9% of by 2016. Part of the challenge that was existing then is to develop a comprehensive compensation for the public sector and to articulate compensation policy in keeping with GOG directive and to ensure that there is a proper retention strategy for public coming out of any review of compensation. So from 2014 up to 2017, we had a series of wage restraints, and in 2017, the Ministry of Finance and the unions who were in negotiation decided that we were going to sign a 4-year wage agreement in order to actualize the full review of the total compensation of the public sector worker. And that's a compensation that would have seen where the most junior personnel in the GOJ was getting 7.5% of the salary of the most senior personnel, and that the salary of public sector permanent secretaries was 12.4% greater than the average salaries of CEO in executive agencies, and where the salaries of permanent secretaries was below that of the persons who are employed in statutory organizations. And as you would understand and appreciate, when we did that comparison with the private sector, it showed that our public sector CEO was about 32% of their counterpart of the private sector. And that's permanent secretaries were around 36% of their salaries in the public sector, in the private sector. Interestingly, the total reward package for office attendants was pegged at around 194% of the same positions in the private sector, notwithstanding the difficulties that we were experiencing in our public sector, which indicated to you that the low wage environment in which we operate meant that there were certain jobs that even though they were being paid at a low rate, that they were still well below what is deemed to be that of a livable wage. So when we looked at the compensation review and the recommendations coming from the consultants, we saw several things that we thought were very, very important. We saw that the recommendation was made to ensure that public sector salaries came up to a particular percentile of the market. This is in keeping with what the unions in the public sector were agreed on with the Ministry of Finance many years ago, called it 80% of market agreement. And the intention in the minds of the unions was that any agreement on the compensation review would be looking at whether or not the 80% of market agreement would still be satisfied coming out of the review of compensation. The government's intention is and continues to be that it wants to simplify the compensation. And part of that simplification process for them is the elimination of the myriad allowances that are across the entire public sector that have, as a result of how we have negotiated over time, would have caused one group or another to get some allowances that would have been a proxy for proper wages. It meant that persons who are being paid a particular allowance would not have the benefit of that allowance in their retirement because only basic salaries were being used to calculate the pensions. If you were in a contributory scheme, only 5% of that basic salary can be contributed to that scheme. So we saw several things that we thought the compensation review, and we're still thinking that the compensation review ought to address. It ought to look at what are the bread and butter issues that workers are facing now. How is it that the worker is going to be surviving in the context of the current economy? It has to look at, in the next few years, what are the prospects of workers where their wages are concerned and whether or not what is going to be happening in the compensation review will be sustainable over the medium term. And in the long term, the workers are looking at whether or not the compensation review will mean that when they reach that age of retirement, that their total compensation or a greater part of it will be used to calculate their pension. So if we are looking at the question in light of what we are seeing in front of us, whether or not it is a real change or whether or not it is inflated expectation, it depends on where you are. For the worker who is earning a low salary, that worker, when they look at the indicative figures that is coming out, you will see, for instance, that an employee who is currently earning somewhere in the region of $500,000 a year has the potential for that salary to move to $1 million per year. And for that worker at the lower levels, that is a true expectation that this program is giving for them. You have those that are at the very, very top, who the CEOs and the permanent secretaries who are very well low paid when you compare them to their counterparts in statutory bodies and in the private sector are now saying that this is also meaning for me as a head of an entity that my salary will now be on par with my counterparts who are carrying out similar levels of work and responsibilities. Then you have those persons who are now in the middle, the technocrats, those persons who are the ones that the rubber hits the road for us in delivery of public services. They are looking on and they are saying to themselves, is this going to mean a true change for me? And I think that is where we have been having most of the challenges with the compensation review, that based on how it has been structured, based on the fact that there are certain allowances and benefits that are to be absorbed into the salaries, the workers who are the beneficiaries of these allowances are saying to themselves, is this going to mean a true improvement in my compensation, or is it that I'm going to be treading water? Am I going to be the one that is going to be bearing the brunt of the compensation review? Because I don't see where, when I look at those indicative figures, my salary is going to change. All I'm seeing is that certain allowances that I'm accustomed to getting, that those allowances are being removed. So one could ask oneself the question, and the question is quite relevant. Is this a monumental change? Will this mean more for me in the medium, the short, and the long run? And one can answer the question in three ways. In the short run, the worker wants to see an improvement in their salary, meaning that when they look at their take-home pay, not just the basic salary being improved, but when they look on their take-home pay, they should see a real change in the take-home pay, given the current realities with which they are operating now economically. In the medium term, the worker is looking to see whether or not this will be maintained over the short run, which the next 3 to 5 years. And after that, the long term, how will that look? We are seeing for the long term that yes, the pensions of public sector workers will be better will be calculated on a better basis. And so yes, the long-term benefit of the compensation review is quite clear. It is very, very clear. In the medium term, we have a promise in the review that whatever market determination that we come up with, that we will be able to maintain that market level going forward. And that means then that there will be a series of negotiations over the next few years to making sure that that level of the market is maintained going forward. And in the short term, and this is where the most critical aspect of the compensation review is, the workers are saying to themselves, how am I to fare in the next year and a half, 2 years of this compensation review? Or it is that I am going to benefit from this compensation review? Is my lot going to be better off? And that is now where I think we're having most of the discussions and the challenges in relation to the compensation review. Am I going to be better off? If you take what the minister has said, and I have no reason to dispute what the minister has said. The minister has said that this will make us better off. How can I dispute that? Is by looking at the figures and analyzing them and taking the individual experiences of my members to tell me whether or not, when they get the figures and look at them, are they going to be better off? What we have seen is that some will be and some will be marginal. Those who are marginal are those who are in receipt of what we refer to as those non-taxable allowances, that when those are absorbed into salaries, the level of change that they are seeing is not as they would expect it to be. And so the question of expectation now becomes a real one. What are the workers to expect based on all the pronouncements that have been made? What are the workers to expect? Are the workers to expect a real change in their compensation? Are they going to be treading water for a period of time? And that is where the conversations between the unions and the Ministry of Finance has been. Or it is that we can ensure that the workers' total compensation will be of such that it creates a real economic opportunity for them in relation to the fact that they are going to be earning more in terms of their basic salary. And two, after you have taken off all the obligations that they have for taxes and so on, are they going to be seeing a real increase in their take-home pay? And that is, I think, where the question now arises. Is this real or is this a pipe dream? For the unions, it can become the best solution if we take certain things into consideration. We have to look at the fact that the compensation review must be treated with and seen as a once-in-a-generational opportunity to fix what has been perennially wrong with the public sector compensation. We have to look at it from the perspective that we can take away the benefits that we have negotiated for without coming back to the table and looking at what it is that we are being asked to give up and what is going to be replacing it. It has to be born out of the collective bargaining arrangements, and we want to use these discussions with the government as a proxy for those collective bargaining arrangements. So we have work to do. We have quite a bit of work to do, be it we as the trade union representatives and those persons who are a part of the government side who are working with us to making sure that this benefit of what we call a compensation review is part of the public sector transformation program that started in 2014 when we first had the report on the intention that this is going to be, in fact, not a pipe dream, but something that is born out of the realities of the individuals that are currently now working in the public sector, that will be working in the public sector in the next few years, and those persons who are going to be retiring in the public sector. Thank you, Lauren, and I hope I've broached the subject properly.
Yeah. O'Neill, thank you very much. Some very profound points, and I'm sure our colleagues who are with us today may have a few questions which they want you to answer for them. All right, but we'll save that until the end of our presentations as indicated earlier. Now, our second presenter is Mrs. Helen Davis-White, and she needs no major introductions. Mrs. Davis-White is the president for the Jamaica Confederation of Trade Unions and the GenSec for the Jamaica Association of Local Government Officers, JALGO. And what many persons don't know about Helen, as she's called affectionately, is that she has been in several negotiations previously. And as such, she had to be invited to share her perspective on this particular matter. Auntie Helen, how are you doing? think you're still muted. You're muted. You're still muted. Okay, speak now. You have some technical difficulties. Not hearing at all. I don't know if we should take Dr. Horton so we can resolve the issues or the issue faced by Mrs. Davis White. Dr. Horton? Dr. Horton?
Hey guys, what's up?
Yes, how you doing, brother?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm doing great.
Good to hear your voice. I'm thinking we may have to take your presentation before Mrs. Davis White because she seems to be having some technical challenges.
Okay. All
right. Go ahead. Helen, we'll come back to you because we're hearing you at all. Good. So, Dr. Horton, Andre Horton.
Yeah, for quite some time now, the IMF and the government have been back and forth as to what the true public sector wage bill should be. And the IMF says that it should fall from the 12% that it was in 2017 to about 9% in the foreseeable future. Now, producers of government services are those people who work in some type of a capacity for the government. And what we're seeing is that because there are over 300 different categories of employment within the government services, then the government now is seeking to minimize that and to make it more comparable across different ministries, departments, and agencies, and also to make it more transparent across different types of employment. And there is no doubt, we understand that the public sector has been one of the most inefficient of all the sectors across the country, across all the industries. As a matter of fact, in 2020, the industry paid out over $260 billion in terms of to its employees. And of that $260 billion, they employ roughly 167,000 people. Now, what my research is showing is that of that 167,000 people, 48,000 of them are not contributing to the overall productivity of the industry, meaning that the same amount of output that they get from 119,000 people is the same amount of output that they are currently getting from 167,000 people. So the overall ministries, departments, and agencies could do without 30% of their total labor. Currently, each person within the ministry, if we're to look at average productivity levels is about 414,000 per annum. So you're looking at the average person working for the government, the average output that they produce is less than 500,000. Currently, the optimal that they could have produced if they were working at their most productive levels is about 580, which is about $167,000 more than what they are currently producing, or 40% more. The overall contribution to the country's GDP is currently 68 billion, and it could be, if they were producing at their most optimal, it could be 96 billion. So the producers of government services could be producing 27 billion more, contributing 27 billion more to the overall output of the country. Now, here I'm speaking about productivity because when you talk about compensation and you talk about person's contribution to output, then you want to know what are they contributing to output versus what are they receiving from the output that they create. And because predominantly in Jamaica, a lot of the appointments in the government sector is normally based on some type of imbalance type of appraisal, and many times it includes some type of nepotism where people gain employment because they are political activists or related to particular persons who are high up in rank in the political parties. They get to realize that the level of output that we want to get from a lot of these employees tend to decline the more people gets added to the employment levels. So you get to realize that it becomes a downward sloping productivity to employment relationship, where as employment increases, the productive output of each person tend to fall. And this has been crippling the overall efficiency of the government industries. And this has also had spillover effects onto other industries, because if government is inefficient and are not being as productive as they ought to be, then this slows up business that relies on government paperwork and government documents in order for them to be completed. And this generally has spillover effects onto other industries in the economy. So the inefficiency that we recognize within the government sectors gets translated into inefficiencies into other sectors. Now, there is not much information available in the public domain as to the specificities of the overall public sector compensation restructuring scheme. What we do know is that a lot of the benefits have been canceled. And as a result, as Mr. Grant quite rightly said, a lot of us who are technocrats and fall in that upper middle tier management level are at risk of losing much of the benefits that we once would normally receive. Now, as he said, the government has pledged that they will make sure that we are no worse off than we were before. And the different workers' unions, for us, we are constantly negotiating with the government to see to it that we come out on the upper end. But everyone is wondering, what is the real nature of this in light of the global geopolitical occurrences that have been taking place across the world? If we can recall that a recession was really forecasted for the world from 2019 based on the global geopolitical tension in Europe between the UK and Brexit. Also, there was uncertainty in output in Asia from China, as well as Singapore and these major countries. And these would have had spillover effects on the other countries across the world. There was a reduction in the demand for German automobiles. So when the COVID-19 pandemic came at the end of 2019, beginning of 2020, this further had production and productivity issues on the country. Productivity across different regions have been slowing, especially because of the global financial crisis in 2009, 2008. Productivity has not reached pre-global financial crisis levels. And the COVID-19 pandemic now has also contributed to the decline in this level of productivity. So the point we're making is that this compensation package has within it, which we have seen, that some type of compensation related performance measure. And if this is executed properly, then this should to somewhat enhance the overall productive output of each person within these ministries, departments, and agencies. And as a result, bring them closer to contribute more so that the particular compensation they receive is reflective of the output they exert. Now, we talk about the war between Ukraine and Russia and the inflationary pressures that is currently putting on the world on people who consume. Now, since 2010, Jamaica has been on a low inflation path. Our inflation has fallen below 10%, and it is until now, when the COVID-19 pandemic hit the island, when our inflation got above 10%. And we expect this to be a short-term measure. If we are able now not to only improve productivity in government sectors, but to use the improved productivity in government sector to facilitate improved productivity in the doing business environment and other sectors that depend upon it as well. All right, so that is it from me. Now I'll wait for question and answer closer towards the end.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Hahn. And I didn't get a chance to introduce you, but colleagues, Dr. Hahn is an economist, one of the best in Jamaica and the Caribbean region, if you ask me. And he's also a lecturer at UWI Mona. So, Doc, thank you again for your presentation. And as you mentioned just now, when we hear from Helene Davis-White, we will take the questions that our colleagues may have online. Okay, Mrs. Davis-White, I'm seeing your camera open.
Yes, my camera is open, and I have been able to unmute myself finally.
Finally, excellent.
Yes.
All right, so thank you very much, Helene. So we're going to now have your presentation.
Okay,
You may go
no
ahead.
problem. Thank you for the opportunity.
You're most welcome.
Not sure what more I can add, except probably to just give some kind of background to how we came to be where we are now in terms of a review and restructuring of compensation in the public sector. Because, you know, when we ask the question, sometimes you get a sense that, you know, there are some who believe that this is something that has been manufactured and that as unions and workers, we were not involved at all in this decision to conduct this compensation review. Truth is, as unions over the years, we have been recognizing that conducting usual, what I call usual wage negotiations, it is not able to get us to where we want to be in terms of having a public sector that is properly compensated. And certainly when you look at what's happening in the private sector and even among public sector agencies and departments. And so for some years now, the unions have been of the view that what we need to really do is to do a comprehensive review and put in place a compensation structure that aligns with pay in the general labor market, that it accords to what is being paid in the private sector and elsewhere. And so I think it went back to 2012-15 when we signed a heads of agreement with the then government. We indicated that a process was necessary to be able to establish a system to pay public sector workers such that you would be able to attract and retain the best talent within the public sector. As it turns out, this agreement only came to be implemented after we signed the 2017-2021 heads of agreement with the current government. And the intention of this compensation review and restructure is to ensure that we are paying our public sector workers at a level that enables us to compete in the general labor market in terms of being able to attract and retain the skills, as I said before. So what this exercise really involves, and for a lot of public sector workers, you know, they have not been able to sort of wrap their heads around what the exercise is intended to accomplish. Many persons in the private sector already are very comfortable and with such exercises, but in the public sector, I think this probably may be the second such attempt at aligning public sector salaries to salaries in the general labor market. And so, you know, persons tend to be very suspicious of the process. But the truth is, this exercise is really one where a consultant was hired to do a job evaluation exercise looking at the various jobs in the public sector, identifying those jobs that could be easy comparators with other jobs in the labor market, and developing a system to be able to accord worth to every public sector job vis-a-vis jobs within the sector and also jobs in the private sector. So what we have here is really an empirical exercise where a market survey was conducted, and based on the results from the market survey, the consultant would be able to recommend how public sector workers should be compensated. But a lot of the decision really has to be made by the government itself. What we sought to do as unions is to, at the outset, get an understanding of where it is that the government would want to place public sector workers within the general market. And what we have been advised is that in terms of affordability, etc., they are aligning public sector workers to the second quartile of the private sector market. And so basically it's really about public sector being close to 50% on average of the private sector market. And so that is what this exercise really is. For many workers, they are still into the usual wage negotiations, the percentage increase and so on. But what I would ask our workers to recognize is that when we come out of this exercise, it is not going to be a definitive percentage increase. It is going to be based on what the relationship between the particular job and a similar job in the private sector market would be. And of course, we also would have a means of being able to slot in jobs that you would not be able to find an easy comparator in the private sector. So that is really what this compensation review and restructure is, how it actually operates and how we are coming away with the kind of information that is now out there. Truth be told, we had disagreement, and as unions, we would have preferred an approach where we would have been involved through the establishment of a steering committee on which we would have sat, and that steering committee would guide the entire exercise. That did not materialize, but we were provided with information at various points in the work being done by the consultants. And not only were we provided with information, but we were also consulted in regards to the jobs to be surveyed, etc. So there was some level of consultation, but we would have preferred if we were integrally involved through the establishment of a steering committee. But that is now water under the bridge, and we are now at the point of reviewing all of the information to do as O'Neill has indicated, to ensure that our workers are able to get the best possible under this exercise, and for us to be able to verify and be able to clarify the information that is presented to us, so that we are clear as to the data that has been gathered and the analysis of that data. So we have now a situation where the government has indicated that no worker will be worse off from it. But our position as unions, it shouldn't only be that no worker is worse off, but we should see an appreciable difference in salaries between of workers as regards what they are currently receiving now. So it can't just be that you are not any worse off. You should be able to see some kind of appreciable movement in your salary as well. The other thing that I think we need to, as unions, be able to ensure happens. Yes, we have gone through this exercise. The information was collected in a particular period. Going forward, we now have to get a commitment from the government that says exercises like these will be conducted periodically to ensure that relativities that are established in this period are actually retained going forward. Because the worst thing that can happen is that we come here, do all of this work, and we end up with a situation where you know, the salaries are aligned to the market, but then down the road, you are not able to conduct the kind of negotiations that you are able to maintain the relativities. And so what we will be expecting and what we are certainly putting on the table is that exercises like these are conducted periodically to ensure that whatever relativities are established are in fact maintained over time, because that is really where we're now talking about the long-term effect. One caution that we always have to say to workers in exercises like these, because it is not a discrete percentage increase as such, you will find different workers having different experiences. And O'Neill sort of hinted at that, where at certain levels of the public sector market, we recognize that you know, the improvements may not be what workers at that level would want, but that is what the data that is coming from the market survey is actually showing us. One means by which we are hoping that we are able to deal with that as well is that we are saying to the government that you need to put in place a policy, a wage policy, where you would want to ensure that the difference between your highest paid and your lowest paid is kept at a particular level, so that you don't import into the public sector the wage disparities that exist in many of our private sector entities, where the highest paid get 30 times the pay of the lowest paid. We would not want a public sector to reflect that kind of disparity. And so that is something that we are also seeking to get the government to commit to as well, putting in place a wage policy that recognizes that you want to ensure that as far as is possible, you have pay equity in the public sector. In terms of what was spoken about by Andre with regard to performance, one of the things that we have actually been in discussions with the government about is how do we implement whatever is finally decided in the context of what is happening with our economy based on the geopolitical situation that we face now. We have been able to get, well, the government has indicated it cannot be implemented in one shot, so it will be implemented over 3 years. Our position as unions is that it should really be front-loaded, meaning pay the greater part of the increase in this first year and the smaller parts in the next 2 years. Reason being that our workers need to be able to recover what was lost from inflation. And when we see all of what is happening in the marketplace now, workers really need to get something in the here and now. So we are trying to get the government to agree to basically front load whatever is agreed for to be paid over the 3-year period. The other thing that we have basically been discussing is that in relation to productivity, that we have to be able to let the Jamaican public understand and accept that once we start this process of ensuring that public sector workers are better paid, that we have to see the returns in terms of the productivity of our public sector. And in that context, we are already looking at an improved performance management system that should ensure that there's greater productivity within the public sector. So we recognize that as public sector workers, we are paid to be able to deliver services in a productive fashion to the citizens of Jamaica, and we commit to doing that. The process of beginning to pay public sector workers what they are worth in various areas is something that we have been fighting for. We are now at a stage when we will be able to accomplish a lot of what are the desires of public sector workers. And we believe that if we do the work that has to be done to ensure that as far as is possible, we get the best deal coming out of this, that our public sector workers will, at the end of the day, recognize the improvements, and therefore we should be able to get better motivated public sector workers coming out of the implementation of this exercise. I leave it there for now.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Davis-White. Colleagues, the instrument or question was posted in the chat. Are you seeing it? I want to hear some confirmations, colleagues. Are you seeing the instrument? Patrick, I think you need to unmute persons. Anyway, nonetheless, it was sent over to the chat section. So let me see if persons are saying yes. All right, excellent. Persons, very good. So colleagues, please, I need your input, your feedback. So complete the instrument as soon as possible. All right, so we have heard all three presentations, very informative and insightful. I have some questions here before I ask colleagues who are signed in on Zoom. I have some questions here from those who are watching and listening on YouTube. And I have a few for Dr. Horton. Andre?
Yes, I'm here. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm going to share with you a question which was sent to me by our colleagues on YouTube. All right? It says, what is the methodology behind measuring output of GOJ workers in dollar value terms? You mentioned it is less than 500K annually.
Yeah, the methodology is simply, output per person. So we have the total output for the industry, and then we basically just divide the total output for the industry by the amount of people who work in the industry to give us output per person, like GDP per capita, but per person within each industry. So that one was specific to the government sector.
Okay, fair enough. I have another here before I move on to Mr. Grant and Mrs. Davis-White. This is a very profound question. It says, yeah. It says, since Dr. Horton said we are valued at less than 500K annually, should the union just accept what is being offered and stop dragging this thing out?
No, not necessarily. Not because the average person is valued less than 500,000 means that each individual's contribution is less than 500,000. Collectively, within the government industry, you have some people who are doing all the work and some people who are doing basically nothing, because some people are appointed on merit while some are appointed based on nepotism. So the idea is to find those who are appointed based on nepotism and other ill-informed bases and weed them out, and to propagate those who are there on merit, so that the negotiations therefore should be based on those who are there on merit, who are far more valuable.
Thank you, Dr. Wall. I'm now going to invite persons to raise their hands who are in the session, and I will select a few persons to ask questions. One of the first hands to go up was Joseph Reynolds. Mr. Reynolds, you may unmute and ask your question or make your comment, please.
Yes.
Mrs. Davis White, please mute your microphone. Mr. Reynolds, Joseph? Not hearing from Mr. Joseph. Or Patrick, do you have to unmute Patrick?
Oh, I can.
Yes, go ahead.
Joseph,
I'm hearing you now, Joseph. Go ahead, please.
Okay. I don't know if this was addressed, but I took the liberty of working out my own salary. All right. And when I look at where, and everybody can start at 0.1 in the scale, my take-home pay will be reduced by $16,000. And I've not yet factored in the duty concession. Now, I'm told that the duty concession that they're going to use as the guide is a RAV4. So I went, took the liberty at looking at the RAV4 with and without duty, a difference of $10,000 US. At 160-to-1, work out at $1.7 million. Over a 5-year period, which is 60 months, work out at $28,000. So in all, Joseph Reynolds will be taking home $44,569.47 less per month on this new system if I go to 0.1 in that scale. That cannot work.
Okay, Mr. That's a comment you're making then.
A comment I'm making, and I'd like for my union and my union rep, my union to handle matters like these. I worked out mine, I work out a couple others in my organization too, but I'm being very parochial in this instance. And how will that be settled? Because I start off, I don't want to repeat, you heard it before.
Mr. Reynolds, I'm not sure if Mr. Grant or Mrs. Davis wants to comment, but ideally you would contact your union. But Mr. Grant, any comments on this particular statement, or Mrs. Davis White?
Right. We have seen instances, and it depends where persons are knowing their scales and where they have been aligned in the 16-band structure, that there are indicators that some persons are going to be worse off. We have made these representations to the Ministry of Finance. We have been able to show and demonstrate to them that persons who are in receipt of non-taxable allowances, that once those are absorbed into the salaries, that they are coming out at a position that is undesirable. The ministry's response is that they want to introduce what is called a temporary allowance to treat with those anomalous situations. The level of those allowances are not set, and we have not been able to properly examine the impact of these temporary allowances because they were just introduced in terms of a quantum in our last meeting. And so we will be looking at that temporary allowance, look at the sustainability of that and whether it's a true remedy to an anomalous situation that any worker will be experiencing coming out of a compensation review. Our principle, our philosophy is that the compensation review must be a true change in how persons, a true and positive change in how persons are compensated. And it must not be one that is going to demoralize the worker, because then it will not achieve the intent of equity and simpleness and so on that it has been exposed to be. So when we go back to Peter principles, the first principles, then it must, for the individual worker, reflect what has been said it will be. And we are not sure, we have not tested it as yet, but we are not sure if this temporary allowance is going to be the appropriate solution to what Mr. Reynolds just indicated as his likely experience. Yes. Now, what he has calculated may not necessarily be the final outcome. It is a set of indicative figures that have been floating around that when the final figures are put out by the ministry may not necessarily be what he has seen. But we do take indicators and we have worked those indicators and recognize that there are weaknesses, and that basically for those persons who are in the middle, and I keep on stressing that, those persons who are indicated to be between levels 6 and 10, that those are the persons who are most at risk for experiences like what Mr. Reynolds would have indicated, and those are the ones that we want to pay some very special attention to.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Grant.
And I would just want to say that the unions in the discussions with the government, we are looking at all of these likely scenarios and to be able to identify any situation that any worker or group of workers may be at a disadvantage. And as Anil has said, what has been placed on the table as a way to solve it is the payment of this temporary allowance. And we are still at this point doing the analysis to determine if a temporary allowance will solve the problem or not. What we would want our members to recognize is that we take information from them, we do our own analysis, and what we try to come away with is the best situation possible. And as Anil has indicated, those people in the middle are the ones most at risk.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Ellie. A question from, I'm seeing a hand up, Marlon Douglas.
Yes.
Go ahead and unmute Mr. Douglas.
Okay, all right. For pensioners who have been subjected to countless MOUs in the past and have now retired, will they have the benefit of having their pensions recalculated, seeing that the concept of compensation is not a new one, and they would have endured sacrifices in salary during their working life, and know that they are retired? Are we just focusing on the current crop of public sector workers, or will retirees be considered as far back as when compensation reviews and salary increases began?
Can I proffer a response?
Of course you can. Anil, go ahead.
Right. So we are currently looking at the legislation, the Public Service Pensions Act. And one of the things that the trade union movement has asked for in the first iteration of the act was for us to have what we refer to as indexation, meaning that as salaries move, that the pensions or the pensioners, their pensions are indexed to current salaries with using some sort of a factor, so that the pensioners don't have to be every so often going to the Ministry of Finance and asking the Ministry of Finance to give them what is referred to as an adjustment on the guaranteed minimum pension. I think the guaranteed minimum pension now in so many regions have $17,500. That is not enough to sustain a worker. We have indicated to the Ministry of Finance that the most efficient way to keep pensioners, the value of the pensions relevant, is to allow for indexation. The government has always resisted indexation because they recognize that the number of persons who are like to go into retirement is going to increase, and they don't want to increase the pensions bill. Remember that the pensions bill is one of the three inescapables under the law, under the Constitution. Our salaries, the pensions bill, and the debt are the three things that are inescapables under the law, and the government wants to make sure that it can control the three. And the pensioners, unfortunately, we have not been able to move the issue of indexation as far as we wanted to, but we have another opportunity in these conversations that we're having around the Act that we will seek to push for indexation. We have asked for it again. We are hoping that the government will look at it seriously and not use the periodic increases in the minimum pensions as the basis of treating with that weakness that we have in our current pension arrangements.
Thank you, Anil. I'm also looking at questions from colleagues on YouTube, so we'll have a bit of multitasking. Let me take Marlin folks. Marlin, you may unmute and ask your question or make your comment.
Okay, just a quick question. The performance management system that I believe Mrs. Davis-White spoke of, is it an improvement or update to the current PMAS system or a completely different instrument?
Ms. Folks, that question is for who now?
What I can say is that they have made a presentation to the trade unions as to what it is that they are proposing in terms of this. I would more want to call it updated performance management system, and they are supposed to have follow-up discussions with us so that we can be assured that it will deliver, because we did have some problems with the original PMAS. And so we need now to finalize those discussions, and we are expecting that that will happen once we have completed this exercise, because, you know, most of us in the movement want to try and finalize the compensation review, because we recognize that workers really need to get some kind of increase now. So once we complete that, then we will be focusing on the proposals regarding the updated performance management system.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Davis-White, and thank you, Ms. Folks. Colleagues, again, the instrument was shared in the chat. If you haven't done it, please retrieve it and complete it ASAP. Okay. I'm seeing a question, a hand up. Renford Watson. Mr. Watson, you may unmute and ask your question.
All right, good afternoon, colleagues.
Good day, Mr. Watson.
I have one question. I have a lot of issues with the compensation review as is, but my concern is I heard that it's supposed to be implemented the second quarter, and I'm here the third quarter. When is this going to actually happen? Outside of my many issues with it, because it doesn't make no sense to start it off, because I have a lot of issues with it. But the actual implementation is what I'm asking about.
Well, I think the implementation is going to be decided by how quickly we clear up all the questions and get the clarifications that we need. And certainly in terms of some of the anomalies that we have identified, the extent to which we'll be able to complete that well within a short time frame. So a lot of it is really now going to depend on how quickly we can complete these discussions with the government so that we can move ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm seeing Marlon again. Marlon Douglas, you have a question?
Yes, just a follow-up question to Mr. Watson. What is when we do agree on an increase, will they be retroactively paid? And if so, when is the retroactive date, if that is the case?
It is agreed that the rates coming out of the compensation review will be effective 1st of April of this year. There was an attempt to try and have the implementation commence in July, but that is clearly not on the cards now, because we are not actually at a point of completing the discussions with the government. And we feel that we need to take the time to have these discussions, because especially for those persons who are not going to be where we would want them to be, we have to have the discussions to try and get them to a place that you know, we are at least comfortable with.
I'm not seeing any more questions at me. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions. Colleagues, are there any more questions you want to ask? Let me look in the chat.
There are 2 hands up, Dr. Marsh. 3.
Right. 3 hands up, no good. Good, I'm seeing 3 hands. I'm seeing Ebony Thompson or Thompson. Ebony, go ahead, please. Give me unmute. Ebony Thompson. Unmute. Okay. Go ahead, please. Not hearing Ebony. I'm seeing Mr. Watson again. Mr. Watson.
All right, since you're not getting much questions, I could just outline one of the issues that I have with the compensation review as is. My issue is currently where my job is positioned, I am paid up 3 to 4 levels below what my counterparts are paid in other ministries. And as the compensation is, that within the first increment, the first year of it, that will not be corrected until year 3. So for me, my biggest issue with it, any alignment taking place should have been to the job classifications and not necessarily job titles and descriptions, and not necessarily to the current classifications. I don't know if you see where I'm going.
I can respond to that.
Go ahead.
It is something that we chided the Ministry of Finance on, and let me use that word as strongly as chided, when they sent out that circular seizing all reclassification exercises on the premise that the compensation review will treat with it. That was not a good move. That was not the best move, because what has happened in this first phase of the compensation review, which is an alignment exercise, they are taking the inequities and aligning them into a 16-band structure without fixing the inequities, and that should have not been the case. What they have indicated is that they want to deal with those inequities in the second phase, or the year 2, which is going to start as soon as we complete this implementation alignment phase. Now, it is not the third year, sir, based on the trajectory that we have. It's going to actually be in the second phase that is going to be, but that's a year too long. And we do agree with you that it ought not to have happened the way that it has. The fact is that the Ministry of Finance sent out a circular freezing all classification exercises. And so those that could not have started were at a disadvantage, are at a disadvantage. And we have pointed out that strenuously to the Ministry of Finance that they erred in seizing these reclassification exercises at the time that they did.
Mr. Grant, one comment on it. The counterpart at the Ministry of Finance that doing my job is actually making almost 3 times what I'm making in my ministry.
We understand and appreciate that, and those are some of the inequities that we have pointed to, because the compensation review should have dealt with that up front, not in the second or the third year, and we agree with you.
And that counterpart has more support in terms of his support staff. He has by far more support, and he's making 3 times what I'm making for doing the same job, same exact job.
I agree with you, my brother.
I think what it points to is that where some persons felt that this exercise was going to look at classifications, it really never did. And these classification issues are the issues now that we will have to treat with, because in truth, that is a classification issue, whether or not where you were placed in terms of the current classification system. So, but what has also been agreed now coming out of the job evaluation, we're going to be using the same tool to evaluate all the jobs. And this tool is different from the original tool. And so there is going to have to be an exercise in each ministry and department, and the process of training teams of persons to conduct those exercises, particularly in parastatals and statutory bodies, will commence, so that at the end of the day, we have workers in the public sector, regardless of whether you are in a ministry, agency, government-owned company, etc. You will all be classified using the same tool, and you'll be able to quickly align jobs, because now you are going to have a job evaluation system that enables you to make the comparisons across agencies, departments, and ministries.
Thank you, Helen. Question from Julia. King, your hand has been up for some time. You may unmute.
Thank you. Yes. Good afternoon to everybody.
Afternoon.
Yes, we have been hearing for a long time about the compensation review, which is long overdue for the public sector. However, I think there is a lack of transparency and communication. Some persons seem to have access to the new salary scale and know where they will fall. And you hear chatter in the corridors that everybody is going to get the first point. Now, for somebody who is at the maximum of the scale and in receipt of a third seniority, how can that person convert to the minimum of the scale? That is one question. Second question, they said level 6 to 10, there is not much, maybe an incremental benefit. But I wish to point out at this level, this is where most ministries are losing their middle managers who go to other more lucrative positions in the private sector or even migrate. So it's not just the top or the very bottom, but you have to pay attention to the people in the middle. Thank you.
So you asked 2 questions. And those are addressed to, that was something like Helena and Oni.
Yeah, I think we agree with everything that she says in terms of, the levels in the middle that we have identified are not going to be benefiting in the same kind of way. And that's something that we're still working through because as we said, what the government has proposed in terms of a temporary allowance, we are still not yet convinced that is the best way to deal with it. So that is something that we continue to work on. The question of the conversion, there is a general conversion rule that is usually used when you have exercises like these. And unfortunately, that conversion rule says if the minimum of the new scale is higher than the maximum of the old scale, everybody converts to the minimum. That's basically what it says. It was done in the case of the health sector and it created a lot of problems. That particular rule, though, does have also a provision where if you are receiving a first seniority, you can get an additional increment, a second seniority, 2 additional increments. So it does have that. But the conversion rule is not about people converting point to point, and that is still something that we are having the discussions about because we know the kind of problems it can create. It created several problems in the health sector, and so we are still having those discussions. But the reason why people would be saying that is the usual conversion principle.
Thank you, Helen. I'm seeing Mr. Alric Brown. Mr. Brown, you may ask your question or make your comment.
Good afternoon, colleague.
Afternoon, Mr. Brown.
Okay, you are hearing me. All right, I have a couple questions. First, what is the official grades that a negotiation is taking place around? What is the official grades? I heard President Grant mention.
The official what?
Grades, the grades that the negotiation are taking place around. Second question is there consideration for the different grades and which portion of it, if there's any rejection of it? So the grades that are under considerations and the ones that we reject.
I'm not clear, Alric, in terms of, yes, because all classifications and grades are going to be used in the compensation review. So there's not going to be some that are picked out and some that are left out. So
what I'm trying to get at, Sir Grant, is
yes,
what the negotiation, what are the targets in terms? I mean, I heard you mention 16 levels.
Right.
I want on record what are
all right. So the 325 classifications and grades that we have across the public sector are going to be condensed into 16 levels. So the exercise that is being done now, which is what they refer to as the alignment part of the implementation, is to fit all of those 325 classifications and grades into a 16-level structure. You know that you have some persons who have the standard classifications like ACG 1, AM this, AM that, AP, and so PA this and PA that. And then you have the executive agencies that have levels. What they are going to be doing, they are going to be condensing all of those into a 16-band structure and aligning like for like in terms of job the preliminary job scoring that they would have done to determine how they place the various classifications within the scales. So that is just to facilitate the alignment. So all of them, executive agencies, correctional officers, police, teachers, everybody have been looked at and are being fit into this 16 level structure, some at higher points and some at lower points, depending on how their salaries are coming out. So we are not like to see a grade or a set of grades being picked out and treated in a separate way. So that's I think the best answer that we can give you for that. Remember too.
Sir Grant, the 16 levels that you're talking about is the one which speaks from 900,669 to a max level 16 of 24.6 million.
Right.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Right.
And my second question was, in terms of the response from the union, what is being considered and what is being rejected out of those 16 levels?
Well, right now it's not a matter of rejection, it's a matter of discussion. No, we your union representatives, we have been pointing out to the Ministry of Finance where we are having challenges with what has been presented to us. The ministry has gone back and have done several iterations of things that they think can solve the challenges that we have been having. We are still having conversations about certain allowances and benefits that have been put on the table. So it's not a matter of us rejecting, it's just a matter of us now having the conversations and the dialogue to see what can be accommodated under the compensation review and what cannot. And we at some point, and I'm hoping I'm not talking out of turn here, we are going to have to make a decision as to whether or not the timing of some of the decisions ought to be done in year 1, 2, or 3. These are some of the conversations that we are having now. So it's not a matter of rejection. One of the things that we try to do as your strategic negotiators is that we don't leave anything on the table. And even if it means us walking away with what we refer to as our BATNA, we have our positions prepared and we know what it is that we can tolerate at the table and what we can't. And if there are things that we can't tolerate, then we will let the employer know strongly that these can't be tolerated. And I think your union leaderships have been doing that quite well. Unfortunately, there are some things that we can't speak of in detail in public because they are sensitive and we don't want to exercise bad faith in our conversations with the government. But generally speaking, as we have indicated, both myself and Mrs. Davis-White, we have been trying to make sure that our interests, our collective and individual interests, are safeguarded in the conversations that we're having with the ministry. And as soon as we are at a point that we can make definitive announcements about certain things, we will ensure that we come to the membership and make those announcements. But there's nothing that we have said yet that we are going to reject or anything that we have indicated that we are accepting. It's just discussions that we're having around the government's policy change, that we are giving them the feedback and using the consultation process for them to continuously improve and reform what has been put to us. And then we can come to a point that we can say to you, our members, whether or not we find that the solutions that we have been given or the challenges that we are seeing have been satisfied and whether or not we can go forward.
Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Grant. I have a question here from Mr. Francis. Let me see what he's asking. He's saying, what is the rationale for having everyone start at the same point on the scale? That came from YouTube.
I don't know what is the rationale. What we do know is that that is a conversion principle that has been utilized for several years by the government of Jamaica. More often than not, as we say, it creates, to my mind, more problems than it solves. And so we always have to have these discussions as to whether or not that is the route that should be taken. We certainly, as unions, generally prefer a point-to-point movement, but as O'Neill indicates, the discussions continue, so we shall see where we end up.
Okay. Other colleagues, this is a question from Carvel Banton. You may go ahead and ask your question. Carvel?
Yes, good afternoon, colleagues.
Yes, afternoon.
Yes, as it relates to the compensation review, right? Is it a situation in which you said the change is going to be implemented over 3 years? Is it a situation in which every the 1st of April every year we're going to have an increase in our salaries similar to a normal regrading?
Right. So the government has indicated that it wants to implement the adjustments to wages over a period of 3 years. The union's position is that we want the bulk of that change to be front-loaded, meaning that we want the majority of what we are to get out of that process to be paid in year 1. Years 2 and 3 of the implementation speaks to a market maintenance approach. What it means is that over the next couple of years that we are still going to be having discussions whether or not the salaries that have been put forward are keeping their market positions, even though this won't be strict negotiations in the classic sense of the term of negotiations. At the end of that period in 2024, that is when now we will go back to what may be determined as the regular negotiation, us looking at and submitting claims, but that is going to be done in a more structured and more efficient manner so that we don't spend half the year or probably a year trying to negotiate percentage salary increases, but on a more efficient mechanism to determine where salaries should go will be determined. So that is the intention of the compensation review. So the short answer, Carvel, is that we are going to be having the increases implemented over 3 years, and the union's position is that we want these to be front-loaded in the first year, and we have not seen any violent opposition to that approach from that request from the union, and I suspect that that will want to be one of the easiest things that we can agree on going forward. But yes, we will see normal adjustments over the next 3 years.
All right, so just a follow-up. Isn't it basically the same thing we're going back to? Because I remember in the past, we had an issue with wage negotiation being dragged over more than 2 years. So now,
no, because we would have determined from now what those will be, and the 3 years really is to complete the full implementation. There will be other things happening in year 2. Year 2 of the implementation would be where the regrading exercises, so to speak, as that Mrs. Davis-White mentioned, that we're going to use the job evaluation tool to ensure that persons are now placed in their proper levels based on the outcome of the evaluation that is going to be done. And in the 3rd year is now going to be an examination to make sure that the market position is being maintained. And then in the years after that, we go into negotiation. So it's not the same, Carvel. It's a little different because it is actually part of the process of the implementation of the compensation. But I do understand what you're asking, though, in relation to whether or not the salaries will be fixed over the 3-year period, and if there's going to be any mechanism in place to ensure that the value of what we are determining now will not be eroded by the time we reach 2024. And that is a question that we have put to the technocrats around the table. We recognize when the figures were first crafted, we do have some concerns about the value of those, and we have had some conversations already in terms of what does the figures mean going forward, and how it is that we are going to make the appropriate adjustments going forward to ensure that the market value is not eroded over the period of the implementation.
Thank you, Winnie. Mrs. Sutherland Lewis, you had your hand up for some time.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Okay, I have 2 questions. One, when you have gone through a negotiation and it's signed and sealed, is it not a breach of contract for the government to just say they are discontinuing the allowances that were signed off on? That's 1. 2, the temporary allowance, will it be for the contract period of 3 years or what? I want somebody to explain this for me, please. Thanks.
All right, let me get a stab at it.
Yes.
We respect the sanctity of the collective bargaining arrangements and anything that comes out of it. The government knows that it can't just discontinue those benefits that we have negotiated. And that is why they have put forward their case in relation to those benefits and to indicate to us that, and this is what has been said around the table, that the level of compensation that we are going to be receiving is going to be the appropriate replacement for them discontinuing those benefits. We have some reservations because we can actually value those benefits, and we want to make sure that any adjustment that we get in our wages will be a true adjustment and that it actually does take cognizance of the discontinuation of any benefit. We have negotiated for these benefits over many, many years, many decades. Some of them are in existence before I was even born. And they are still being used by public sector workers, albeit not at the rate that we ought to be using them. And that therein is part of the problem that we are having, and I must be open with it, is that some of the benefits that we have negotiated are not being accessed by the membership. And because of a lack of access, the value of maintaining them is no longer there. And so we have to basically look and determine whether or not these are benefits that can be done away with, and whether or not there is something that is more suitable or adequate that can replace them. In relation to the second part of your question, the temporary allowance, the questions that you have raised are the questions that we have as well. It has been introduced. We have asked questions about it. We have asked the government to come back with the explanations that we require. We have serious concerns about the sustainability of the temporary allowance and how temporary is temporary. What is going to be the nature of the allowance? Is it going to be factored into how one calculates one pension? But the very fact that it's called a temporary allowance suggests that it is going to be for a period of time, and then other adjustments will flow. From my estimation and from where I sit, without giving the full explanation, and I'm just telling you what my personal interpretation is that when we do the job alignment exercise in the second phase, it may give reason for the discontinuation of the temporary allowance, and that the temporary allowance is just a carrying on adjustment so that no worker is worse off until the job evaluation exercise is complete. So on the face of it, yes, it is temporary, given the analysis that we have applied to what it means. In terms of the questions as to the sustainability of it, or whether it's going to be a true adjustment for those workers who are seeing anomalies, those are yet to be answered.
Okay. Thank you very much, indeed. Let me see if there are any questions. Colleagues, again, the instrument was posted in the chat, so you may access it and complete it. Thank you. I'm seeing, is that Supat? Janelle? You may go ahead and ask your question.
Good afternoon. I'm borrowing Miss Supat's device. I'm Natasha Sewell. I have two questions. I hear a lot of talk surrounding the performance, mainly suggesting that a part of the reason why public sector workers are not performing is because of salary, not being compensated properly. But one major issue is understaffing and lack of resources in these government offices. Is there anything on the table to address that part of it, as it relates to if we are expected to perform, which everybody would prefer to be doing, at a certain level where there is understaffing issue? Are we intending to address that? Where there is lack of resources and systems in place, are we intending to address that? That's one. Two, second question, as it relates to traveling officers, persons who are expected on a daily basis to use their own motor vehicle to perform their duties. I understand that the traveling will be rolled in, but how do you compensate me for wear and tear on my vehicle outside of just paying mileage? Those are the questions for now.
Suppose those are for O'Neill and Mrs.
All right.
Davis.
Okay, Helen, you want to go ahead?
Yeah. The question of the performance and whether or not what is being proposed will take into account that you need to have the government departments properly resourced, both in terms of human resources and other resources. That is something that we have put on the table that needs to be considered in this reformed or new performance management system. In fact, in the first performance management system, that's one of the reasons why we had insisted that it should start with a supervisor or manager being able to sit with an employee to determine the performance measure that they would be required to meet, and if it would give the employee the opportunity to be able to say, I can't meet this because I need additional staff, or I need whatever equipment, etc. So that's one of the reasons why we put that in. But one of the things that we are saying to government generally is that they have to invest in the public sector. It cannot be a situation where, because even if you're getting all the pay in the world, and some of the times you need just basic tools to do your job. Your surroundings, when you look at where you're working, I have had persons say that they don't really have anybody come visit them at work because they are ashamed of where they work, because the conditions under which public sector workers work in some situations are really atrocious. So we are saying that we need to have the investment in the public sector. Part of the difficulty, though, that we have, sometimes it comes down to a question of which comes first, the chicken or the egg. At this point in time, what we have said, and the government has basically agreed, let us tackle the question of the pay, and then we will look at the question of performance and what it takes to get people to perform at their optimum level. The issue of the traveling officer and what is being proposed, it is proposed to absorb the upkeep into the pay, and to continue to pay the mileage. What we have said to the government is that, especially for persons who have to travel to do the job, because you have two different types of traveling officers. You have some who are declared bona fide, but they really don't travel. But you have others who actually travel, and for many of them, where they travel to and the wear and tear on the vehicle means that they have to spend a lot of money to be able to upkeep the vehicle so that they can use it in the performance of their jobs. So we have said that the government needs to take that into account, and whether it is that you deal with it by setting the mileage at a rate that allows people to be able to recover that, or well, that is the best solution that we have come up with so far, if it is that the upkeep is going to be rolled into pay. So we are not actually totally convinced about the absorption into pay, particularly for persons who have to travel to do their job. And so we are still in the discussions about how it is that such employees will be able to recover the cost of being able to properly maintain their vehicles so that it can actually be used to do the government's work. So those are discussions that are still ongoing.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Davis-White. Our question is in the chat. It's a very good one. It says, could you say whether all the unions and associations are collaborating in this regard? Are all on the same page with the same level of understanding? That's for Mrs. Davis-White and Mr. Learned.
Well, what I can say is that once the government, once we agreed with the government about the conduct of this compensation review, and over the period of the review, there have been, as I indicated, consultations, although we may not be happy with the level of the consultations. Once we asked for and got the initial set of documents, certainly at the level of the Confederation of Trade Unions, we all met at the board, and persons indicated, different unions indicated what were the concerns that they had. And based on those concerns and another set of discussion, we developed our response to the government of Jamaica. And so all the unions in the Confederation, well, I wouldn't say all, I think a majority of the unions in the Confederation would have responded. And based on their response, the ministry was provided with the JCTU's position. And it is on that basis that the negotiating team, which comprised 5 union leaders, have started the discussions with the government. And I expect that when we get to a point that we can actually report back, then we will be getting the views of the individual unions, and from that, on that basis, we'll be able to come to some agreement with the government of Jamaica, because we are going to be coming out of these discussions with traditional heads of agreement, and usually it is based on what the majority of unions in the Confederation are happy with.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Davis-White. I'm seeing Janelle Willis.
Hello, good afternoon.
Yes, blessings.
All right, good afternoon. I want to ask, you said you were still looking to the compensation for the middle scale, correct?
Yes, we still have concerns, particularly in the middle levels up to, I think, from about 6 to 10.
All right, do you have a percentage that you're looking into, or that you're going into the negotiation?
As I indicated when we started, this is not the traditional negotiation. So it's really a comparative exercise. So you're looking at the worth of one job as against another. And so it's not really a situation of a percentage as such, because if you look at the exercise, even for those that we have no real problem with, you will see that they are different. When you bring it down to percentages, you will see that there are different percentages, because that's not really what it is based on. It's a comparative worth of the job when you go into the general labor market. That is really what it is based on. There may be some systemic problems in the middle levels that probably has resulted in or discomfort with what is there now. And that's what we're seeking to work through. I think, as O'Neill has indicated, some of it may actually be situations of classification issues as against the alignment issue. But we have to sort of delve deeply into that for us to be able to, find some kind of resolution. But the resolution that we are looking for, while we're comparing jobs, we're not coming away with a percentage as such. We just need to be clear as to the worth of this job in this level as against the worth of the job in the lower level. Are there deep overlaps or not? Those are some things that we have to look at as well, because some of the times when you clear overlaps, you provide movement going up. And so those are the things that we are really examining to see what is the best that we can get for the levels that we have identified, because especially in situations where persons at those levels receive allowances that are going to be absorbed into pay, those are the ones that we are actually concentrating on right now.
Thank you, Ellie. Okay, Mr. Griffiths, you may go ahead with your question or comment. Mr. Griffiths, nothing from me. Let me check on YouTube if there are any questions from our colleagues.
Sorry for the delay. I was having a little bit of problem to unmute. There was mention about a document, or not a document per se, but a system where persons who are in receipt of seniority allowance could be compensated by increments or something of the sort. Is that a document that can be accessed by the public? That's the first question. The second question would be, there are some allowances that still are to be announced, but would play heavy on persons understanding how this exercise would directly affect them. Has there been any further updates on how these to be announced allowances have been worked out? Thirdly, will there be an increase in the mileage allowance since duty will be rolled into the package, and not duty, I mean upkeep. And since upkeep will be rolled into the package, upkeep before was not taxed. It's now going to be taxed. What would be the compensation for this? Those three questions. Thank you.
What's the try? Mr. Grant, you want to?
Sure. Sure. Let me take the last first. Mrs. Davis-White did answer it already, that the proposal in relation to what is going to be the compensation for the absorption of transport allowances into salaries would be an increase in the effective mileage rate. What that level is has not yet been determined, has not been put forward to the labor movement, and so there's no finality on that particular matter. In relation to the issue of the seniority allowances, yes, those using the conversion tool that will be used and the indications that we have received from the technocrats at the ministry is that there will be a conversion tool that will recognize seniority and that it will be used to determine how far up the scales people go. So that has been answered. I'm not remembering the middle question, Glenroy. I'm not remembering your middle question.
Go ahead with the first question.
I responded to the first and the last, but I'm not remembering the middle one.
All right, before I jump to the middle one, in regards to that calculation, or that's what you are referring to, is that public, available to the public, or will be available?
In terms of the conversion rules, no, there's a general rule that is in the staff order, and it was expanded in a circular that spoke to when posts are upgraded, retitled, and reclassified, how persons are to be treated. And there is an argument whether or not this is an upgrading, reclassification, or retitling exercise. There are discussions that we are having in relation to point-to-point movement versus a conversion rule. Excuse me. And each exercise of this nature does have its conversion rule. The problem that we're having is that this is not a reclassification exercise in its classic sense. And so the rules that the Ministry of Finance wants to apply is one that is dealt with when you're having persons being put into a new compensation structure, which is not necessarily a reclassification because you still maintain your old classifications. Excuse me. So we are having the discussion with them in terms of what it is that is more desirable to the unions, which would be us looking at a point-to-point movement. The Ministry of Finance has said that they want to use a conversion factor. And so we are not yet at a position of saying, okay, we have settled on a way to move persons into the new scales. And we're hoping that we can come to some finality on that not too long from now.
All right, so the second question did tie into what you're talking about in terms of some of these aspects of the negotiation package have some to be unknown segments.
Okay.
And create some confusion into persons working out how this process will really affect them, the true effect that we have, and it is creating anxiety in some groups.
Okay, so there was a document I saw that spoke to the various allowances. I'm even certain that the recommendation document coming from the consultants report that was shared widely, would have also indicated some of the allowances that they were recommending ought to be absorbed, discontinued, or restructured. Things like duty allowances, overtime rates, honorarium, supper meal, and so on, those types of allowances, they're all subject to the review. Some of them are going to be continued, some will be discontinued, and some of them will be restructured and to put them on a different platform, a different basis. I don't have the list at my disposal right here, but I think it is readily available. If you look in the consultant's report, there is a schedule inside that report that spoke to their recommendations. If it is not available, I think it's something that can easily be accessed through your union representative.
Okay, just be shared here, so we could probably.
As I say, I don't have it readily available, and that is a part of the challenge. But I'm sure that the union representatives can get copies and share with the team. It's not a embargoed document, so it shouldn't be something that we are told that we can't discuss with our constituencies.
Okay. There's another thing that popped in my head, directly related to my group. I am a contact investigator, and I don't think that there is any other group that could be compared to CIs. How then would there be a correlation between comparing us or putting us in a particular band, and how would we be sure which band we are placed?
That's a very technical question. The compensation experts would have used certain factors that they would have applied to various jobs to determine where they should fall in the structure. Again, that's technical data that I don't have. I can't speak definitively to it, except to say that all the jobs that are in the various groups would have been scored initially, and that would have influenced how they are placed in the 16-band structure for the initial phase. And then they are now going to go down and do the detailed or the targeted job evaluation exercise to make sure that what was done initially is in fact the appropriate level that these jobs have been placed.
Just generally speaking, when you do these kinds of exercises, you start with what are called benchmark positions, which are positions that you are readily able to find comparators for in a market survey. Those that you are not able to find comparators for, usually there is a statistical means of being able to slot them in. And that is a well-known principle in all of these job evaluation and reclassification exercises. You concentrate first on the benchmark positions, and you have a statistical means of being able to slot in those, because every job comes out with a score, and you would do things like looking, it sort of get very technical because, as I said, there's a statistical means of doing it, and that is how they would be able to slot in those that you would not be able to find comparators for readily in any kind of market survey.
Okay, thank you very much. Colleagues, I want to take a few more questions and then we may have to close. Dr. Nesbitt, are you hearing me?
Yes, Dr. Marsh.
Yeah, man, blessings. You may go ahead with your comment.
Right, good, thanks. Good afternoon, colleagues. It is good to have these kind of discussions. A lot of things have been covered by the unions, the public sector unions. I would just like to encourage them to continue the advocacy for the public sector workers. Because when you hear some of the talk coming out of GOJ, the Minister of Finance, speaking about certain allowances and the fact that it's wasting resources for people to preparing concessions and so forth, I wonder what he's thinking, because that is service to the internal customer within the system. And the fact of the matter is, by way of context, what is happening with the public sector review, which Helen stated earlier on, is something that for a long time. It has been happening right from the 1980s across the globe. I mentioned it in the YouTube chat. It's called new public management, new managerialism, where you're using public sector approaches, private sector approaches in public sector entities. And this has happened all across the globe. In Chile, in this region, for instance, there would have been a massive restructuring of the system within the public sector using those said approaches. And this is what the government is doing. And we know that there would have been changes going along, because with neoliberalism taking course since the 1980s with the right of the move of the new right, all in the guise of efficiency. But what is needed in all of this, and I'm glad the unions have reinforced commitment to ensure that equity occurs across the system. But one thing that people need to understand, when you have balance allowances being rolled into basic salary, they're lost forever. So the dilemma is to determine what allowances are critical to the functioning of the public sector and public sector entities right across Jamaica, and move forward with that, because we at my place 20 odd years ago, we would have had a similar kind of massive restructuring, reclassification of the system. And we use the same approaches, benchmarking, as has been mentioned before. But in this case, the public sector being a historically strong body with its own rhythm and history and heritage, you can very well see O'Neill mentioned the numerous positions and categories being coming down into the teens, around 16, I think he mentioned. But I think the dilemma is for all the public sector unions in Jamaica to be at one accord as it relates to how this thing is being done. And we know that times have changed, and unions and workers' organizations tend to have a different approach now. But the guard cannot be let down when these youngsters who are running the country believe that they can do any and anything as it relates to rationalization. We know we're tied to the bilaterals, the IMFs of this world, World Bank, etc., the IDB. And a lot of what we get is conditioned by that kind of relationship and how well we comply. But the key is balance, because that has been proven time and time again with people who would have used the same approach, call it whatever we call it, compensation, restructuring, rationalization, etc. It is new public management in taking its course. It's our time now, but the watchdogs of the workers must continue efforts to ensure that there is the appropriate balance. Because in the end, as you two would know, and it has been said in this forum, that the necessary results might not come. And the aim is to streamline the work and to ensure that workers are recognized for their input. And too often in this country, people bash public sector workers. Yes, there are people, like it happens in any other sector, who might think, but it's the responsibility of those in charge to ensure that service and professionalism is the order of the day as it relates to what people do. So I just like to encourage the unions to continue and the work to ensure that the government of Jamaica don't just run roughshod over the current system in the name of efficiency. Because sometimes when you have these changes, a dog and a cat, they have fur, but they're two different animals. And therefore, when you look at what is happening and the examples in the world, the use of new public management to address public sector reform must be done with caution and the necessary balance to ensure that those who are in the system working for years will benefit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nesbitt. Just a question from me to, I want Dr. Horton and Mr. Grant and also Mrs. Davis-White to answer. Do you believe that the restructuring will lead to any kind of redundancy or job loss?
Well, I certainly don't foresee that right now. In all our discussions with government, current government, previous government, we have indicated that this idea about a particular number of public sector, of workers who should be in the public sector, we don't ascribe that kind of approach to determining the size of the public sector. It is about what services you want to deliver, how you want to deliver that service. If it is about compensating your employees, it's about where in the market you want to compensate those employees. So one of the things that the discussions that we had with Minister very early in the day was about if we do have this wage bill to GDP ratio, how can we vary it to implement these increases without it having any impact in terms of job losses? And we were told that by agreement, the international partners have agreed, although some of them may be wary, that the target could be varied to be able to implement this compensation review. So in terms of whether or not it will result in job losses, based on the kinds of discussions that we have been having and the understanding that the size of the public sector should not just be based on the amount of money that is available, but the fact that you need to deliver service and deliver it efficiently. And in that context, you would then be could look at whether or not the current level of staffing is appropriate, but it should not just be based on the size of the wage bill.
Yes, hi. Yeah, as I was saying, based on the numbers, I agree with what Ellen is saying, but from a productivity point of view, we have seen that a number of people have been added to the employment who are not really contributing to the total output. So we would have liked to see a overall restructuring of the employment system rather than just the overall of the compensation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arnold. I'll take one more question. Gray Westmoreland, you may go ahead. You're muted. Unmute. Mr. Westmoreland, unmute your microphone. It's not happening. I'm going to move to someone else. Robert Tulloch, you may go ahead with your question.
Good afternoon. I'm sorry I did not get all the details because I was in and out of court today. But my thing is, I don't know if this has been answered, although I heard, I think, President was saying something close to it. But for example, like myself, who have been promoted some years ago, but I've just, next year I'll be entitled or get it for my seniority. Will this new compensation package remove me from my seniority allowances, which I should have received next year? That's my question.
Mr. Grant, you want to try that? You want to take that one on?
Yeah, good. Sorry, good questions. And these are some of the anomalies that we want to see put to the ministry. How are they going to deal with the transition arrangements of persons who are now at the maximum of their skills, who have been waiting a year now and are now in the second year of waiting to get their seniority, because you know the rules say that you get your seniority after 2 years. That's a clear anomalous situation that has to be factored into when they're looking at the conversion rules, because you are not to be put at a disadvantage because of the change in the government policies. That's a principle that we have in compensation. So your case is unique to you, but there may be others similar to yours, which we will now put the question to the Ministry of Finance for that solution when they are looking at the conversion rules. All right.
Thank you, colleagues. That was the last question. I'm seeing several hands, but I may have to speak to my planning team to have a follow-up to this particular forum, because I know it's a very topical issue. I cannot take all the questions today. All right. So I'm going to now ask Mr. Doyle to thank the participants for attending and also our presenters for sharing the information. Mr. Doyle, are you with us?
I'm here, Larry.
You may go ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. And first of all, I want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Dr. Andre Horton, Mrs. Helen Davis White, and Mr. O'Neill Grant, and also the acting head of the Institute, Dr. Marsh, for moderating the session. I mean, this session, we put a lot of work into it. And here at the Institute at the University of the West Indies Open Campus, we do take pride in bringing the issues that are most central to workers, right? Whether it be public sector or private sector workers, right? We do take pride in bringing those things to the fore so the discussions can be had, so workers can be, have the information and be very clear in terms of what is being done and how it will affect them going forward. So I want to thank the presenters for coming and sharing the information in the way that they did, in a way that persons could readily understand. And I also want to thank all the workers who would have turned up today. We're seeing that we'll have had over 300 persons on the Zoom platform and almost 400 persons tuning in on YouTube. So I thank you very much for coming out to supporting our efforts and for the questions that you would have asked. And for the persons who did not get to ask their questions today, you can definitely send those questions to us at the Institute at our email address, which is hlstui@open, that's open.uwi.edu. And we'll certainly try to get them answered for you and respond as well in a timely manner. All right, so I want to thank everybody again for coming out, thank the presenters, thank the moderator, right, and thank you pretty much the participants. And I hope that the information that was shared was really and truly well received and put you in a position to not only understand the issues that are being discussed in the arena, but also in a position to make the decisions that are in your best interest and in the country's best interest. Right, so thank you very much for your time and your effort. And I will see you at our next public forum, which will be coming to you sometime soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Dylan. Colleagues, have a wonderful afternoon, and we will see you soon again. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, take care.
Bye.
How much for those, please? Before I log off, are you